Madeleine Albright knows a lot about fascism. She was a refugee herself after her family escaped Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia and settled in the U.S.
I, Madeleine Albright.
In 1997, she became America's first female Secretary of State. It was a time of hope. The Cold War had ended, and 9/11 was unheard of. Now, she's written a book called Fascism, a Warning, as it seems a march of maybe not fascists, but certainly dictators is underway. Russia's President Putin held his grip on power with the help of some ballot stuffing in the last election. China recently changed the rules so President Xi can rule indefinitely. And, of course, there is North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And now, threats to democratic rights in countries like Erdogan's Turkey, Duterte's Philippines, and Maduro's Venezuela. Around the globe, democracy is in crisis. Only 45% of countries are now considered truly free. The rest only partly free or not free at all. It's the 12th consecutive year of decline. Seems like fascism is becoming fashionable, and it's elicited some unexpected support.
I had a call with President Putin and congratulated him on the victory, his electoral victory.
It's statements like that from an American president that has the former Secretary of State worried about the future of her own country. And Madeleine Albright joins us now from Portland, Oregon. You have written, "Will we stop Trump before it's too late?" What's too late, and how will we know?
Well, I think that the reason that I issue this book as a warning is that we can't normalize the kinds of things that are going on in this country now, kind of hoping that everything will go away. And so I do think what we need to watch very carefully is what happens to the press. Democracy depends upon the freedom of the press and not being called the enemy of the people. Respect for the judicial branch of government, specifically because of the kinds of allegations that have been made by them, by President Trump about them, and then whether he is acting more and more as though he's above the law and dividing people more. And so one of the quotes in my book that I think describes things better than anything else is something that Mussolini said. He said, if you pluck the chicken one feather at a time, people won't notice. And so I want to point out the plucking of the feathers and that we really do have to be very watchful and say, no, this is not the normal way to behave. We want the democratic institutions that this country has grown up with.
Are you suggesting that Trump is plucking the chicken?
I think he is plucking the chicken.
Is part of your warning about President Trump, are you going so far as to call him a fascist?
No, I am specifically not calling Trump a fascist, but I do think he's the least democratic president that we've had in modern American history.
You know the threat. Your parents fled the Nazis. Your grandparents were slaughtered. You know fascism. It feels so long ago to people, to younger people today. Do you think that they understand the threat of what it's like, actual persecution is like, the lack of freedom, the sense that your neighbors are spying on you? Do they understand what the fear that you have?
You know, I'm actually grateful that they don't know it in themselves, frankly, because it was so horrendous. But I did want to have them understand, and that history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but there are historical examples that need to be looked at. And one of the things about having been born in Czechoslovakia is that that word appeasement really came into practice at that point when the British and French made a deal with the Germans and Italians over the heads of the Czechoslovaks. And so I think it's important to point out how this happened when we just kind of want to get along, normalize things. And so I am telling a pretty stark story.
Are you suggesting that President Trump is involved in appeasing other fascists in the world?
Well, I'm somewhat concerned that he is appeasing President Putin. President Putin is a KGB officer, and he is playing a very weak hand very, very well. And I think we need to stand up and really realize what's going on. And for me, appeasement is a four-letter word, and I think we've got to be very careful not to appease those that are trying to undermine our democracy.
I want to talk about North Korea. There are talks coming up. Trump is going to meet with the North Korean leader at some point, it sounds like. You were the first Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State, to go and try and broker some kind of deal years ago. That didn't work. Do you have advice for President Trump on negotiations with North Korea?
Well, I think that when I was in office and I went to North Korea, we got very far. What it did show was that it was useful to have diplomatic discussions on both diplomatic and technical levels with the leaders of North Korea. I'm concerned about the fact that whatever talks happen, they have to be done in a very disciplined way. And at the moment, there is even disagreement or lack of agreement on definitions about what denuclearization means.
Doesn't sound like you trust Trump not to mess this up.
Well, I'm concerned about discipline. I am concerned about the amount of knowledge that's generally there. And basically, I don't think it can be one of those things where you decide, okay, this is a good meeting, the deal is done. Because it's complicated and it's going to have to be followed up. But I don't want to be pessimistic about it because I have really wanted there to be diplomatic talks. I am an optimist, as I often say, who worries a lot.
One last question about democracy. As democracies around the world falter, as the U.S. loses some luster on the world stage, there's more focus now on Canada as a great defender of democracy. And do you think Canada's up to the task?
I have to say, not just because I'm talking to Canadians, I have believed that Canadians are the best international citizens. I do think Canada is up to it. And I personally have been a great admirer of Canadian approach to their responsibility, your responsibilities and involvement, and the desire to have partners.
Do you miss being at the table?
I do miss being at the table, but I'll tell you what, it took me a long time to find my voice, and as you can tell, I'm not going to be quiet.
Well, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.